This is Boom and Bust in Modern America, Objective 2, Part 1, about the 1950 to 1970 economic boom. And like the Roaring Twenties, this boom follows a war, in this case, World War II. However, initially, there really was no post-World War II economic boom. Memories of the unemployment and insecurity of the Great Depression still lingered. Suicide rates and divorce rates had both gone up in the 1930s. With less money in their pockets and low self-esteem, there had been a decline in birth rates. People just didn't see how they could afford to have kids. World War II had brought some relief from the economic depression. Remember, when stuff blows up, you got to make more, so that increased demand and supply and jobs in the war industries. But many predicted that the relief wouldn't last. Many believed that GIs would come back from the war just to jump back in the breadline. GDP, or gross domestic product, after the war initially declined, which is one of the biggest indicators of how your economy is doing. War production again had boosted it, leading many to believe that another Great Depression was coming soon. As a result, people were too afraid to spend any money that they were getting after the Great Depression. Also, 4.6 million workers are going on strike, fearing the worst and wanting stability. They don't want to go through the Great Depression again. And things like the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947 outlawed closed shop or mandatory membership in unions, required union leaders to take a non-communist oath. Operation Dixie in the South attempts to unionize the South. Operation Dixie is in 1948, by the way. But it failed amid fears of racial mixing in the unions. White workers didn't want to work with black workers and vice versa. The bottom line was that the government was trying things to keep the economy up, including selling war factories and other government installations to private businesses at low prices. They also passed the Employment Act of 1946 to promote maximum employment, production, and purchasing power, as the press release went. The Servicemen's Readjustment Act, also known as the GI Bill, was signed into law in 1944 by Franklin Roosevelt. It was trying to account for 15 million soldiers coming home. The government feared the economy could not reabsorb them, giving them jobs and spending money, etc., etc. So the GI Bill sent 8 million soldiers back to school at a cost of $14.5 billion, essentially to give them something to do and hopefully improve the economy. One other part of the GI Bill was to provide for $16 billion in loans to allow veterans to buy homes, farms, and small businesses. This stimulated the construction industry and therefore the overall economy, and the hopeful long-term benefit was that men who had served our country could now go back to school, get houses, and boost the overall American economic culture. But eventually the 1950s would take off in an economic boom that would last for 20 years, all the way until the early 1970s. After a brief recession in 1946 to 1948, the economy takes off in one of the three greatest economic booms in U.S. history. Again, the 1920s and the 1990s being the other two prominent ones in the 20th century. In 1948, the GDP began to pick up, and then in 1950, it blew up. America was now 6% of the world's population, producing over 50% of the world's goods and gaining 40% of the world's wealth. National income doubled in the 1950s and then doubled again in the 1960s. The middle class officially returned after being off for almost 20 years in the 1930s and 40s. Remember, the middle class came to prominence in the 20s by being able to charge things, and after 2 decades of economic downside, they came back. Those who used to simply strive for a chicken in every pot during the Great Depression were now more interested in having 2 cars in every garage, and a backyard swimming pool, a vacation home, and an RV. By 1960, 90% of American families owned appliances and a television set, which had actually been invented in the 1920s, but wasn't mass marketed until the 1950s, and you can see why. The viewing window on the 1927 model was a little small. So what caused the post-World War II economic boom? Well, one common thing here you're going to hear is the word again, or does it sound familiar? Because frankly, it's just an updated version of the 1920s in a lot of ways, with one big difference. We'll get to that in a second. But we're going to start with the Korean War of 1950 to 53. Again, massive military and defense spending on those projects increased demand for a lot of steel and things like that, supply, jobs, and spending. Also, Republican tax reductions. Once again, more money for spending and investment under President Dwight D. Eisenhower. And again, like the 1920s, the automobile, after a 20-year decline in the market, was back. And this wasn't the Model T. This was the classic car with all of the electronic goods that went along with it. With the white wall tires and the tail fins in the back and anything you could possibly want, the 1950s vehicle was very attractive to consumers and something they really wanted to spend money on. And let's not forget, once again, other electronic durable goods. In the 20s, it had been the radio. And in the 50s, the TV started to dominate things. Now, of course, at first, from the 1920s models, there had been slight improvements on the television, a slightly bigger screen. But soon, the television became the entertainment and news programming center of the house. The TV dinner became popular in America. The TV tray became a staple of American life. And there was one instance in a town in Montclair, New Jersey, they flat out broke the sewer system because the Gillette Fight of the Week was on a Friday night, and the entire town got up at the commercial break and flushed toilets at the same time. The American television broke a sewer system. But there were also other things as well. Household appliances that they all had in the 1920s, again, all but the microwave, became prominent again in the 1950s. The washer, the dryer, the refrigerator, the stove, the toaster, the vacuum, all of those things from the 20s that people couldn't afford in the 30s and early 40s had now all been improved and were now mass-produced and affordable. Electronic durable goods became a huge part of the economy, just like the automobile. The ripple effect was once again felt in the industrial spending cycle. Automobiles and electronic durable goods again boosted the spending cycle, as did transportation and commerce, food and farming, and especially road construction. Back in the 20s, it had been Route 66. Now, it was the Interstate Highway Act. As highways started to be developed across the country, as we'll find out later for Cold War purposes as well, they turned America into the interstate highway system that we know today, with all the odd-numbered highways like I-75 in Michigan running north to south, and all the even-numbered highways like I-80 and I-90 going east to west. Home and business construction once again took off. You had the Levitt towns that got it started, and neighborhoods that eventually became more compact by Levitt imitators, until you had massive compacted tracts of suburbs that were all requiring different materials like for construction. And like the 1920s with the new highways, you had gas stations, new types of gas stations popping up all over the place again. The steel for the automobiles, durable goods, buildings, bridges, again. Rubber for the automobiles, again. Fabric and leather for automobiles, construction, and clothing, again. Glass for automobiles, buildings, consumer goods, again. Concrete for the roads and the buildings, again. Lumber for buildings, again. Paint for everything, again. Basically, the economy was taking off. And there was also a post-industrial service sector known as white-collar jobs. White-collar work started to pass blue-collar work during this particular time. and also the war economy that started to take place in the 1950s, specifically in aerospace, plastics, and electronics. The transistor had been invented in 1948, something from your timeline, or for your timeline, which led to the computer called ENIAC, which, as you can see, was not a small personal computer. In fact, it couldn't even fit into a single room. A computer that could fit into a single room was a pipe dream at that time, much less one that you could have on your phone. But businesses in this industry started to expand as well. International business machines, also known as IBM, started to expand during this particular time. Boeing is going to introduce its first large passenger jet in 1957, and also came up with the first Air Force One in 1959, both dates that should be on your timeline. It's also the decade that we're going to start seeing NASA. We're going to start seeing test fighter pilots. We're going to start seeing rockets near the tail end of the decade. The new war economy, the aerospace industry, plastics, electronics, was going to become a big part of the 1950s economic boom. And like the 1920s, there was a post-war European market. Europe, especially after World War II, which had been even more destructive than World War I, needed a lot of rebuilding again after a war. And again, they bought most of what they needed from the United States. Europe wanted the newly mass-produced consumer goods created in the United States again. Basically, demand for everything was high in the United States during the 1950s, just like it had been in the 1920s, and the European market doubled that demand again. Now, how did advertising play a role in this? Well, this is the golden age of American advertising, which we're going to take a look at in Part 2. Thanks for listening.